Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is going to be a really fun program tonight. It's going to be fun for me personally, first of all, because Jen Palmieri is one of my dear friends. We worked together in the Clinton White House when we were both teenagers.
It was a special program.
Yes, and she also worked with me in the scheduling office for a short while during our 8 years.
Can I tell the story about the first time we met?
Let's hold off for 1 sec. I'm not sure what that story is, but my husband and children are sitting in the back row there, just FYI. But anyway, this is going to be a lot of fun. Jen has had a remarkable career. She worked with Leon Panetta. She served in the White House in many roles. One, as I mentioned, she worked in the Clinton office, the scheduling office with me. She served as the deputy White House press secretary in the Clinton White House. She served as President Obama's communications director. And obviously, she served with Secretary Clinton and was the communications director for her presidential campaign. She is a brilliant author. I don't know if any of you have read this yet, her first book. It's terrific. And we are just so grateful that she included Little Rock as a stop on her national book tour. Her book has been #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, which is very impressive. Yay! And I'm so pleased to see such a great crowd here tonight. I want to recognize and thank Dean Skip Rutherford and Nikolai DePippa from the Clinton School and co-hosting this event with us. Thank you so much, Skip.
I was texting with Mary today. She says hello.
Yes. Now that baby, when is that baby coming?
She is ready for that baby.
Okay, and I know you guys are probably as well. But let's go ahead and get started. Dear Madam President is the name of this great book. Jen, tell us who or what inspired you to write this? Why did you write this book, and how did you come up with organizing it in this way as a letter to the first woman president?
So after the election, and well, first of all, I'm just so excited to be in Little Rock. I love coming here. I'm so sad because I have a 6 a.m. flight tomorrow, which is terrible. But I worked for President Clinton for 8 years, and it didn't matter wherever you were from in the world. Like when you came to Little Rock and you worked for Bill or Hillary Clinton, you guys have always made us feel like family, and I just love coming here. So it's really great to be here again. After the election, I wanted. It's like I think like a lot of people, you want something good to come out of this, right? And and this weird thing happened because I was really worried when we first lost. I had the thought, what are little kids going to think? What are little girls going to think? And what are women going to think? And how I thought, wow, women who are thinking about running for office are going to look at what happened to Hillary and be like, oh, gee, here's what I want to do. That looked like fun. I want to go do that. And then it was amazing because shortly thereafter, you found that's not how women reacted, right? You had to decide if you weren't for him, you had to be like, either men like that were meant to win in America, or what this shows, her defeat and him winning, what that shows me is all those doubts I've had in the back of my head are right. Like we were playing by the wrong set of rules. And I felt like just a very outdated set of rules. And women deserve better, can be better, and we're just going to do things differently. We're just going to engage differently in the world. And I wanted to get at what that was about, and thought I had seen, because when I started working for Hillary in the campaign, I didn't actually think it was going to be that hard to elect the first woman president. And I just saw a lot of the obstacles and thought, because of that perspective, and then also just having worked in politics for 20 years, I adopted some own lessons in my own life that, I weirdly felt optimistic about the future and wanted to convey that. And it was not easy to get people to think that was a good idea in the publishing world at first. And I just hit it with the right agents who, interestingly, were Republicans, 2 men, but they were not supporters of President Trump. And they were the ones that said, start this on November 9th and look forward and just draw the conclusions about the lessons that you've learned that are going to help people going forward. And that was the only and then I just found that it really flowed. I wrote it in 2.5 months. It came together very quickly, yeah. And I like writing. As it turns out, I like being in a room by myself, and I think this, send.
Well, you are a very
right?
good writer, yes.
Greg, not 19 people weighing in. Yeah, just like, I think this, send. Yeah, it's great.
Want to, if you will indulge me, I'd like to read a short passage in the book that talks about women and ambition, and then I'd like you to give us your thoughts. This is on page 44. When Hillary first started the 2016 campaign, she sought out the advice of women academics and researchers who have done a lot of work looking at the issue of women and ambition. After listening to them and others, our polling team advised us that Hillary's ambition needed to be expressed in terms of her desire to serve others. Otherwise, her campaign to be president was off-putting to people. Our culture still tends to characterize ambitious women as pushy, conniving, and selfish. This is not unique to politics. It's true for women in any walk of life. That's very depressing. So, talk a little bit about the notion of Hillary's ambition sort of being in that box of to serve others, and does that work? Or
Evidently not.
But
well
why
enough.
do women have to jump through hoops and try to be smart but not too out there, and
Right.
be, speak firmly but not be too firm? It's like a balancing act.
That is exactly right, because there's the other thing, I think it's in that same chapter, well, it's in a different chapter, but the advice that we would get. So we got advice like that about how, that was from Sheryl Sandberg, gave us that advice, and some other women researchers, academic researchers. It was like, and it's disheartening to hear, right? Because you're like, really? She's got to say everything's got to be about in service to others? I mean, at some level, that's why she wanted to be president, right? She wanted to solve problems and help people. So you're like, all right, I guess. And Hillary was, you might surprise those of you who know her well to know she was fine with it. But she was like, whatever, if that's where people are, like, if that's what I got to do to meet people where they are and convince them that I can lead them, I'll do that. But the attribute that they liked best in her, which I found this really dispiriting, was that she had been Secretary of State for President Obama, and that what that meant was she was willing to put aside her own ambition to work for the man who had defeated her in an election. And that showed that, like, see, she really is working in service to others. That, and it wasn't that she did a great job as Secretary of State. It was she seemed to do something that was selfless, which really surprised me, because it's not as if being Secretary of State is some kind of punishment, right? I thought it's a privilege, and I thought it was gracious of President Obama to ask her, right? So, but that is, it is, and everybody liked her concession speech a lot too. And I thought, well, what's that about? Because I bet if I didn't work for her, if I worked for President Obama, I would have thought, wow, that concession speech was so great. Why didn't we see more of that side of her when she ran? And I think what's at the root of that is, when you're running for president, you have to say, I want the most powerful job on the planet. And you have to say, as a woman, like, listen to a woman, listen to me saying this, I want the most powerful job on the planet. I am the best person on the entire planet to have that job. And here are all the reasons why the guy I'm running against is terrible and I am better than him. Like, that's awful. That just sounds, we still have trouble hearing that from women. And, when she ran in 8, the polling showed that people weren't sure she could be commander-in-chief in the beginning. And then by the time the primary ended, a majority of Americans believed Hillary Clinton could be commander-in-chief. And then when she ran in 16, it wasn't a question at all, right? Like, not an issue at all. So that's progress. I feel like I saw the ambition piece as being the last hurdle. And I didn't think it was that big of a deal in the beginning. And you're like, why are we still struggling with this? But if you look at it from the scope of human history, it's a radical thing for a woman to be in charge. And Hillary's mom, Dorothy Rodham, many of you probably know her, she was born on the day that the Senate gave final passage to the amendment that gave women the right to vote. Okay, so it's been less than 100 years. it's still kind of new. And I think Hillary, we ran her, and this could have been a disservice to her. I think maybe it was the only way we proved that she could do the job just like a man, right? Just like everybody before her. And I think that's what the baby boomer generation did. They had to prove, I can do the job just the same way as he can. Nothing will be different. No allowances will be made. It will be exactly the same. Well, that's not good, right? Why is it exactly the same? And that's what I think is sort of ill-fitting, is that we still struggle with that last piece of this, the why does she want that job?
Let's talk a little bit about mentors. I know that I had a ton of mentors along the way. I know you and I have had some of the same mentors in the White House for sure, because we weren't really teenagers, but we weren't too far off. Two young women working in a pretty powerful place. Talk about some of your mentors and what kind of role mentors have played in your life.
I think we had ones that we both have is Evelyn Lieberman. Janice too. She was, as Stephanie said, we all called her Mrs. Lieberman, including President Clinton, including Mr. Lieberman. She was a former school teacher, but she just commanded that kind of respect, no matter what her job was. And her first job in the White House was, she was Maggie Williams' assistant, right? So she was the personal assistant to the First Lady's chief of staff. And, which is, like a cool job, but it's not a very senior job, but she just commanded respect. And eventually she became the deputy chief of staff of the entire White House. And all of us would seek her out. We called her office the crying room. That's also detailed in the book. After she left the White House, my office became the crying room. And Stephanie's office is a permanent. We were different floors. Stephanie was on the ground floor. I was on the first floor, so there was always a space nearby. But Evelyn, so all of us young women sought her advice, and she would say, like in one sentence, it's the best advice I've ever got in my life. People take their cue from you. And so if you act like you belong in the meeting, people will think you do. If you act like your opinion matters, people will think that it does. And, Stephanie, I watched Stephanie but like, she's joking, but you were like in your mid-20s.
26 when we got there and 34 when we left.
Right, me too. We're the same age.
Yeah.
And, but Stephanie Street just commanded respect in those hallways and anywhere she went. And it was just, act as if I am in charge, act as if I belong here. And you gotta believe, that only works if you believe in your gut. I really do, and I really do have value, and I belong here. But
we jokingly called it "fake it till you make it."
Yes, but we did indeed make it.
We did.
But that is, but we had a lot of great
Alexis, lots of wonderful.
Yeah, a lot of women that Hillary, Maggie. A lot of women that were like maybe 10 years older than us that paid this way, and we had great men too that we worked with. Leon Panetta was my first boss. I was really lucky. He just happened to be my congressman, and a really great public servant to learn from. One big takeaway I took from both President Clinton and President Obama was the value of the perspective of people who don't look like everybody else, right? Like President Clinton, this is a big priority for him. Who's in the room? How diverse is the staff? What perspectives are represented? And I learned it's like the people who don't look like everybody else. It's the people who didn't all go to the same schools, who maybe went to state schools. They're the ones who had the most interesting perspective that for either President Clinton or President Obama to say. And with President Obama, he would, in meetings, if you hadn't spoken at the end, he would ask you, what do you think? What do you think? And usually, as you might well imagine, it's women who haven't spoken. And that is where that's where the discussion got interesting. And it's like, that's what I really want young women to know. It's like if you're the oldest person in the room or the youngest person in the room, or it's 6 guys and 2 women, I think sometimes women can think, I should hold back. And what I learned from Evelyn is no, you gotta speak up. And I see it makes all the difference when people, particularly if you have a different point of view, if you made it heard. I don't think anybody looks at the world today and thinks, wow, we have it all figured out. No one thinks that. No one looks at the world and thinks we don't need to hear more perspectives. So I feel like if everybody, men and women both, shared more with themselves, it would be better. And that's a lasting legacy of Mrs. Lieberman.
About Secretary Clinton really as a mentor, not just during the Clinton White House or in the Obama White House as Secretary of State, but throughout that grueling campaign. I always hear from people, and I've experienced as well, she always had time to ask you about your children or your family, or are you okay? Are you getting enough sleep? You don't look like you've had enough to eat. Like, talk a little bit about her and sort of that role that you saw in her and still do.
Yeah, it's amazing because we had, when we would travel, we had the little makeshift compartment that was Huma and Hillary and I think the press imagined that, we were up there plotting, and we're up there like looking at InStyle magazine and Architectural Digest and talking about shoes and just letting it be a normal space. What did you watch on HGTV when you were having your hair done this morning? And she did, my sister was very sick during the campaign, and Hillary would weigh in with doctors. Let me check it out. Is it the best doctor she has in Dallas? Are we sure? What's this new facility she's gone to? Do we think it's really going to be the right one? My dad had to have eye surgery, and I was freaking out about it. And she's like, give me your phone. What is this? This is a letter from the doctor. It's fine. Tell your father it's going to be fine. Tell your sister to stop worrying. I was like, Hillary says it's fine. Everyone's like, okay, good. And she would get back on the plane after, if we had had a day off, and she gets on the plane, and she's like, oh, I had the best day. And she goes through her day, which sounded terrible. And it's basically like finding medical care for all of her friends and all of her friends, extended family. And this is her hobby, right? That is what she... Setting people up. People who I had no idea that I was like, FYI, Hillary asked me if you guys were getting married. She's like, how does she? I don't know. I know no one's supposed to know, but Hillary Clinton just looked at me and said, so do you think so-and-so and so-and-so are getting married? I was like, what? Yeah, she knows everybody's business. And she, so it's just remarkable how she would, that is what, Bill Clinton says, right? You leave Hillary Clinton alone for a place for a month, you come back and it's a better place. And, and it was really hard, that campaign. People say, it doesn't look like you guys were having any fun. It's like, we weren't having any fun. It was terrible. Did you see what it looked like? But we loved everybody, and we loved her, and we knew what we were doing was really important, and we all stuck together. And there's no family like, Clinton's staff family, whether it's from his years or that campaign. But it was hard. And so I asked her, how do you do this every day? I need to know. Asking for a friend. And she said, I don't get overwhelmed by the enormity of whatever is in front of me. I get up, I do the best I can do that day with what's in front of me that day, and then I get up and I do it again. You're like, sounds simple. Yeah, sounds simple. And in the end, that's all anybody can do. When you have these jobs that are inhumane in terms of the demands, you have to understand all anyone can do is that. And it really made it easier for me to get through it.
Another, I'm not going to read this passage, but I was just looking over it, where you talk a little bit about the nod. Can you talk about that and what that means?
Why don't you want to read it?
Well, no, there's so much. I'm afraid I will start crying. But talk about the nod, and then we'll segue into women crying in the workplace and your thoughts on that. So tell us what the nod is.
The nod, what I relay is Huma coming in to talk to me on election night to get an update. And so I explain, here's where we are. These are the states we still need to win. And, it was looking pretty bad at that point. And she's like, what are you saying to me? And I said, I'm saying... This is what Stephanie couldn't read. I think there's a very good chance that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. And she just goes, just nods. And I nodded too, and I thought, so not surprising, but remarkable. What are we doing? The two of us, it's the worst possible outcome that we spent years of our lives fighting against, and we just both nod. And I imagine in that moment, all like the times I see Hillary nod, the times, all the bad news I've gotten in the last 2 years, you're going to lose the Wisconsin primary by 22 points. Oh, okay. We're going to lose New Hampshire by 20 points. She has to testify in front of the FBI. That's going to be 4th of July weekend. She has to testify in front of the congressional committee that Russians hacked us and they're leaking information to help Donald Trump. You're like, oh, okay, all right, sure. I'll just put that on my to-do list because that's what happens every July, a presidential campaign. This stuff was insane. And we always, it's particularly as women, you just programmed to be I can't blanch. I have to prove that I am tough enough. And I am really tough. I don't feel like I have the need to prove it anymore. And you wonder, what if I'd handled it differently? What if at some point I'd said, that's crazy, we can't absorb that, or we got to do that differently, or, not just had to felt like my first reaction isn't what's the right thing to do necessarily in response to this news. It's how do I look like I can handle it? And that just I think that prevents us from making the best decisions.
In sort of that same chapter, you talk about showing your emotions in the workplace. And to be honest, I still haven't completely embraced that part of it. I agree with 98% of your book. And I'd like to believe that, but it just seems I guess it's just the world we grew up in. And I'm a nodder myself. And, you can't show, you're always told as a young woman, never let them see you sweat. Or cry, or put on your game face, or fake it till you make it. So talk a little bit about sort of showing emotion in the workplace and why you think we need to do a better job of that and not feel like it's not appropriate for women.
So I wanted to be sort of provocative in this. It's the opposite ends of the spectrum. There's the nodding where we absorb everything, and then on the other side, it's the crying that I think almost every woman I know and a number of men, it does happen. At some point you cry in the workplace. I don't sob openly at work, nor do I advocate for that. But, I am easily moved to tears because when I'm talking about something that I care about. It's already happened once here. It'll happen again before we're done. And then sometimes women, this is why we had crying rooms, because it's just, you're just so frustrated and it's so hard and you just need to let it out. And what concerns me about the stigma it has is that I think at the root of it is a sense that being a woman is something you have to overcome to show you belong here. That's I've thought really hard about what is it? And I remember I was talking to this one woman who's an anchor now, and she covered President Obama, and she talked about how one time the press secretary then made her cry. And she's I felt like I'd been exposed. It's such a telling thing, right? It's now they see I don't actually belong here. They see I'm not actually tough enough. And it's it's a test we put ourselves through to show whether or not we really fit in. And, people talk about, some of my colleagues would say, some of my female colleagues would complain during Clinton, during Obama, all the time, oh, it's a man's world. And I would really bristle at that because I think I'm doing great. I feel really supported by men and women both. I have a great career. I've been really fortunate. I don't feel like it's a man's world. And I think there are still vestiges of that. It's no, Jennifer, you're just doing well in a man's world, but there's still these vestiges because, we spent centuries making the workplace was created originally by men and it's been around for centuries. And some of these things still linger. And I think they probably hold men and women back. So I want to challenge the thinking that's underneath that.
So one of the most poignant sentences in the book, in my opinion, is this one. And you say, frankly, I am surprised to find myself advising you and other women on how we can reach equality with men. I spent most of my life thinking we were already there.
Yeah, I did. Did you?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, again,
right?
Same Jennifer. I mean,
we
owe.
I did. I think
owe so much to the women before us. I mean, I did work on the Hill in the 80s, and but I was very young, my first real job, and but like you said, in the Clinton White House, in here at the Clinton Foundation, I don't feel like, I need to be quiet and let somebody else speak, or I felt I could just be myself. I didn't feel like I had to put on airs necessarily. I mean, clearly you always want to be well informed, and sometimes maybe you haven't done all your homework and you kind of put a little air on there, but I'm kind of like you. I thought the women had already paid the price.
I thought that was Hillary's
But
generation.
now it doesn't, I'm looking at things, it seems, with a different lens.
I really do. It's a big, I really thought that. That's why I would bristle when people would talk about being a man's world, because I was offended by that. I was like, you're saying I'm immaterial, or I don't matter, or I don't fit in, and I feel like I do. And then, and I thought it was like all Hillary's generation. I was like, we owe them a debt of gratitude. Now we get to do whatever we want. And the way I look at it now is that, I've always thought I could do a job the same way a man, or just as well as a man, but now you're like, well, I don't want to. I want to do it the way I want to do it. And I had people during President Obama, some of my female colleagues would say, why did you stay so late last night? Like, a guy wouldn't do that. It's like, okay, well, I don't want to do it like a guy. Like, it was important to me to do the job well, and I wanted to do it well, and so I stayed late. And that is, I don't think like also like following just the way that we've traditionally thought of, like, we used to, our beloved male colleagues that we refer to as the white boys, that they, what? I don't remember there was a worse name for them. These are the guys that didn't have a lot of responsibility, and they just got to pontificate about what they were going to do.
Advisors.
They were advisors, and we're like, well, when do we get to be that? And we're just sort of built differently. But yeah,
giving me the look.
Yeah. But what his win revealed to me was that that men like him still exist in the world. That there are still these obstacles that women have to overcome, and that we still try to fit into roles that have traditionally been held by men. I feel like that's what happened to Hillary. That's what we did to her. We actually set out to prove it didn't matter that she was a woman. That was the goal, which seems ridiculous now, and robbing her of a lot of her own qualities. But that's what the women of her generation would do. I can do it just the job that's the same as him. And I think that we hadn't really appreciated that true equality can be something different. It can be that women just don't get to do the same thing as men, because that means women get the same opportunity. If men and women are represented equally in Congress, that means that Congress is going to be a little bit different. Congress is probably going to be better because it's going to be more fully representative of everyone. And that doesn't take away from anything. That's additive. And so as discouraging it is that you think, oh, we're not there yet, I think there's some part of it that's inspiring, because you think, oh, it could actually be different. We just had this really limited sense. We thought all we were supposed to want was what we had seen men have before us. And maybe we want something a little different. And maybe when women are fully integrated, and all people of color are fully integrated into politics and business and however they want to engage in the world, well, it's going to be a better place. So it's a lot more work, but ultimately it could be better.
Well, I could sit here and ask you questions for the next 2 hours, but I'm sure there are folks here in the audience who would like to have an opportunity to ask some questions. So let's open it up, and please wait for the microphone to come to you before you ask your question so everyone can hear. I think right here in the very back.
Jennifer, thanks so much for coming. My name is Angela DeNovi, and I am a student in the Executive Master's Program with the Clinton School, and also I'm a fan of yours and follow you on social media. And I appreciate both of you first talking about the perception that you thought that women were already there. I'm a little bit younger than you. I worked on the '96 campaign as my first election, and I agree with you. I thought we were there too. And this was really surprising. The question I want to ask for both of you is, at what point, so you were faking it till you made it in your 20s, at what point, was there ever a point when you had that confidence, when you knew yeah, I really do belong here, it wasn't a question every day, every meeting someone new who's in a more powerful position than you? Did you ever reach that point? Because I'm not there yet.
I did in the Obama White House, and the funny thing was, in the Clinton White House, I didn't have any problem speaking out, because First of all, no one completed a sentence in 8 years. Including poor Bill Clinton. Like, the man is interrupted constantly. Like, I mean, I remember when I left, I was like, you guys, it's different out there. Like, people wait till somebody stops talking. Like, we're gonna have to, flagging, it's a problem. Everybody's gonna have to reprogram themselves. But in the Obama White House, when I was the White House communications director, so I had the platform, but I also had the responsibility of when I spoke, the President of the United States was going to act on what I said, and that was really scary. And I kept thinking, there's somebody gonna be who's better than me at this job. And I had in my head people who I knew were smarter than me, would be better at me, and so I got really tripped up. And then finally, I decided to allow myself to believe that if you had a national competition to find the person who could be the best White House communications director, you could find somebody who was better than me, but not that much better. just like marginally better. And I'm the one who's here. And Barack Obama's president of the United States, really smart guy. He picked me for this job. And, he said something in a meeting once of women where he could tell somebody was holding back. And he was like, speak up. You are in the room. Like, look around. See how the office is rounded corners? It's the Oval Office. Like, if you don't speak up, basically it's like, if you don't speak up, you're not doing your job. You're not bringing yourself to this effort. And it was that combination that made me realize, and this is like a good thing about having had our jobs in our 20s, because like we saw Bill Clinton, who as brilliant a guy as he is just a human dealing with problems for which there are no good solutions, and you just gotta go and just gotta know in your gut, like, I am like, once I let go of the idea that I had to be perfect, it let me be really good. And that's when I felt like I could let go of that stuff.
For me, when I first went to the White House, I was the deputy director of scheduling, and I held that position for 2 years. They went through 3 or 4 directors of scheduling, I think, in that 2-year time period, because it's a tough job. And you had to know how to play well with others. You had to, understand that you weren't the person making the independent decisions about how the president would spend his time, that you were really in charge of running a process whereby all of the senior folks in the White House would have a voice at the table. And ultimately, there was a very tight process on how the schedule would get put together. And you had to have a backbone because people were always trying to go behind your back. You had to have a really great relationship with the chief of staff, which I had a wonderful relationship with Mac and Leon and Erskine and John, and that worked out. But for the first 2 years, I was the number 2 person. So I was always, sitting back, waiting for my turn, waiting to be called upon, asked upon. And then one day, after 2 years, they finally decided, okay, well, she's young, she's from Arkansas, she's 28 years old. I think she's proven herself, let's go ahead and give her the job. And they made me the director. And so at that point, I realized I couldn't just sit and wait to be called upon, that I had to run all the meetings. I had to go into the president every day by myself, or take somebody with me, or to brief him. If you followed my social media today, you'll see that I posted a picture of Jennifer and I in the Oval Office briefing the president in one of those daily meetings. But that's when I sort of feel like I got my sea legs, and realized that it was so scary. I remember just the butterflies and knots, and we used to have these big meetings in the cabinet room with all the assistants to the president. Secretary Clinton would come sometimes if it was like a foreign trip, and you're just sitting there like presenting all of the information. You're the person showing like what the different options are. It's pretty stressful. And so the first couple of times I did it, but then you do it every day, and you just kind of it's still kind of scary, but then it's not as scary. So that's kind of when I realized, I guess that was in about 97, 98. When I realized, yeah, this is me. I have to be prepared. I'm the one making putting the information out there, it better be right. And I learned very quickly with President Clinton, do not fake it till you make it with him. You can fake it till you make it with some other people, but don't ever try to pretend like you have the answer if you really don't. I learned real fast that he will totally call you out on it. So it's best just to say, you know what, Mr. President, I don't have that information, but I'll get right back to you.
There's no one who knows airports better than Bill Clinton. Like, even 20 years ago, it would be so annoying. He's like, are you sure? Because I think John Wayne is closer than LAX. And you're just like, oh my God. Can't you worry about Bosnia? What? And he was always right. Always. It was so annoying. Well, I don't know. I think John Wayne's gonna be closer than Burbank. You're just like, oh my God. I don't think. And then you'd be like, I don't think you can land the 747 there. Yes, you can. You can land the 7. He's like, oh God, he knows everything. Who's next?
Right here in the very back, in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you very much I haven't read your book, but I will try and read it. I can't promise you, I don't want to lie. But I'm very interested in the topic. I'm a retired law professor from UALR, and I taught mainly around race, but I did a lot of gender things as well. And one of the things that I was surprised at, and I guess maybe, and you might have said it, is that you all were surprised. I'm sitting there thinking, what? They were surprised that sexism is alive and well, and chauvinism, even though I know Stephanie some, very accomplished. The one question I have, though, is I've heard a lot of things like what you've been talking about, what your book is about, and I do want to read it. But I have not yet heard, and I'm not saying for you to give it now, but I wonder, is there in the hopper a critique of what also may have been the issues with the campaign outside of the gender issue? Because what I teach my students is we can always look out there and say race or gender or immigrant status, and many times that's right. But what else? And I wonder if that's in the work somewhere. I mean, all of us probably have some critique, right? I'm talking about a real study critique that people like yourself who are involved in it can look at the process and say, aside from the gender and all of that, these are the things that in our campaign we could probably have done differently and might have helped lead to a different result.
So I think that, and I don't conclude, by the way, that she lost because she's a woman. I think that, I felt like I wanted to contribute what I could contribute after this election, and I felt like what I had the best, that this is what I had the best perspective on. And in terms of, and all I could do is write from my own perspective. I'm not an academic. I don't, it's just this is what I lived. See what you think. I do have a chapter in there at the end about America in the 2016 campaign. And there's lots of people have written, there's been books that have been written about the campaign from reporters that are they should have done this, they should have done that, tactically, right? Why didn't you go to Wisconsin more, and I don't feel that there's a ton of value in, and I don't do the mechanics of campaigns in terms of get out the vote and polling and that kind of work. I'm not sure that there's a lot for America to necessarily learn from it, but I'll tell you what it did feel like is the campaign was a reckoning of frustrations that had been roiling under the surface for decades and sometimes hundreds of years. And we saw it. President Clinton, Hillary, they saw it. They saw it early. And, they both said, we've never seen anything like this before in American politics. And when those two tell you that, it's very sobering. And we're not sure that we can reach these people who are so disaffected, so discouraged. And we couldn't. It's not like we didn't. We tried to talk to them. We tried to listen to them. And it was way too late. And what I feel like fundamentally is at the real root of this is that this country was founded on this amazing principle that all people were created equal, and we franchised a very small number of people with that concept. People who are white, male, and owned land. And we disenfranchised a far larger number. And that bill is coming due. I mean, that's like fundamentally, like that is what it's, I saw it, people think about this because we're the side that lost. People think about this as it is people who supported President Trump. It's voters who are white and from these particularly distressed pockets that, some of whom voted for President Obama because they wanted change and then voted for Trump because they were disappointed they didn't get the change that they wanted. But I saw it everywhere. I saw it with the Black Lives Matter protesters whose parents had been civil rights advocates who focused on voting, but their kids want slavery dealt with because the country was founded with that at its core, even though it supposedly is on this principle of everyone being created equal. And, I saw it with women. I saw it with dreamers. I saw with the coal miner that Hillary met in Kentucky that couldn't support his family anymore, who, America promised him a certain kind of life and it didn't materialize. Like, that is, so what I find inspiring about that is I look at the way, there's so much work, and I think this presidency is doing real damage, and it's going to take a long, long time to come out of it. But I see the way people reacting at the grassroots level across the board from all demographics, the way the Parkland kids reacted, and I feel like, okay, this is going to be the generation that makes that great principle apply across the board. And so I feel like that's a lesson. That's what I believe, and I think that's something that that's a useful thing to take away from this election.
Here.
Thanks, Jennifer, hi. Welcome back to Little Rock. It's great to have you here. My name is John Banger, and I'm one of the volunteers here. And it's really an incredible honor to be a volunteer and to have the opportunity to talk about our 42nd president and also to hear the wonderful stories that we hear from people from around the country and from around the world. I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay. Stephanie, I'm fortunate enough to volunteer some over in the foundation offices, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for Stephanie Street and all the work that she does. We also have in the foundation office primarily women who work in that area, and they're some of the most brilliant people, and it's a great treat to be with them. My spouse didn't want to come this evening to this event because he was afraid that he was going to really get discouraged again, because we've all gone through our emotional ups and downs over this election. So I thought, I'm going to ask a question that might hopefully be a little bit more humorous. Tell us what you recall as possibly the funniest thing that ever happened to Stephanie or from Stephanie when she was in the White House. Because now, I may never volunteer in the foundation offices again as a result of that, but I thought, well, why not? Let's have a wee bit of humor, because we always need that to keep moving and moving forward. Can you do that?
The first time we met, so I was really scared because I worked for Leanne Panetta when Leanne was the budget director, and we were in a different building, and then he became the chief of staff, and so we were like the new people, and I hate being the new people, and none of us had worked on, Leanne didn't work on the campaign, I didn't work on the campaign, so it was like the first time people were coming into the West Wing that hadn't been part of the 92 campaign, and Ricky Seidman brought you into the office. So Ricky was the head of scheduling at that point, and Ricky's just this very spiritual, really warm, loving person, and she's like, Jennifer, I want you to meet Stephanie. And she brings Stephanie over to my desk. She's like, this is Stephanie. You're going to work with her every day, and she's amazing. You guys are going to love each other. And Stephanie is just shooting me daggers. And Stephanie's like, and it's just like it's like the nod, the Stephanie smile. I was like, this is gonna be terrible. And it took like a week, but at that point it was like we were good, and like you saw, like I was like, oh, she's like normal and nice, and we like worked together great, and I became her deputy. But then she did admit later, I hate new people.
I just probably, like to make sure that everyone has the right motivations.
Because you could just see what Ricky was trying to do. Ricky's like, this is Stephanie, you're going to love her. And then Stephanie's just like, And I was like, oh man, here we go. But actually, I have to say, the funny thing about going to the West Wing because I was in the EEOB, which is like the big office building at the White House complex, and worked at the budget office, and it was, people who had been working there for decades as part of OMB, and it's like the best of the best, the creme de la creme of the federal government, these like really smart, very serious people. Yes, yeah. Adrienne Erbach was one of them. She's still super smart people, but very serious. And then I was like really intimidated. And then the funny thing is you get to the West Wing, which I thought would be even more intimidating, but it was more like it's sort of the camaraderie that you have on Capitol Hill, that it felt very familiar to me. And and it was like I got welcomed in and feeling home in Little Rock, and it all worked out great. But that first day was a question as to whether or not I was going to make it with Stephanie Street. And I was and trust me, I was informed that you need to be friends with Stephanie Street in order to survive here. So luckily for me, it worked out.
Yeah, John.
Maybe.
Yes. Who else has a question? Oh, Dave is here. What a special treat.
Oh my gosh. Hello, Dave. This is exciting.
Hey, so nice to see you. So were we all white boys?
No, you were a hard worker.
So I wanted to relate an anecdote I had heard that kind of broke my heart, even though it wasn't a politician I was a fan of, from Advance. And for most people in this room probably do know what Advance is, but it's the logistical work that's done in advance of the presidential visit or the candidate. I was told that Elizabeth Dole, when she ran for president, when she had town hall meetings, which she didn't do very often, that she had tape marks for every single step she took across the entire town hall for the entire hour. And to me, that seemed symbolic of a person who just felt they were in a straitjacket to be what the world wanted them to be. Yeah. And I always felt like, Hillary Clinton was not that, but I felt like she had, it always seemed like there were elements of that hemmed her in, that were not of her own making or her own fault. So anyway, it's more an observation.
So I've thought a lot, because people say this, about women politicians or women leaders, or that they, they're hard to work for, or they're demanding, or they're hard on staff, or they have to have things regimented like you described. And what I think is at the root of that is a sense that women have that they have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. I used to help Elizabeth Edwards on the Edwards campaign, and then just as a friend, and I worked for Hillary, and in the times that I would do work for Mrs. Obama, it was no one ever said to me, you got to step it up a notch because you are helping women here. But I felt it, because I felt the pressure. You could just feel the pressure that they felt, that they had to be 100% perfect. And, I would literally put more effort into briefings that I did for Mrs. Obama than I did for President Obama, because I knew you could just sense that pressure. And I felt it for Elizabeth in the preparation that they put, and I felt it for Elizabeth when she was a candidate's wife, and then when she was just doing public speaking, and I certainly felt it for Hillary. And I think, maybe that's something we put on ourselves, but I bet if you got Elizabeth Dole in a private moment and asked her, think about it, is that what's at the root of it? Like, I think that's what it's about.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Christine McCall, and I just wrapped up my first year at the Clinton School. My question is, and I haven't yet read your book, I'm going to pick it up when I leave tonight, so you may address this at some point. Do you believe in your lifetime that you will see a female president? And if so, who in the current political arena could fill that role and step up?
I do, and it's funny because after Hillary lost, sort of like initial reaction from the intelligentsia was like, oh, that was, well, obviously we're not doing that again. That was, we can't like have a woman be the nominee in 2020. And now I think, and now you see after all the women, we have like record number of women candidates, and now it's like, well, if it's not a woman, you're going to be stepping on all of your energy. So and I think that, Hillary proved it can happen, right? She got more votes. And we did it the hard way. So I think a woman could win as early as 2020. I do certainly think that we will see that in our lifetimes. And there's a number of women on the Democratic side that might do it, and I think it's plausible that it's such a jump ball in 2020. I think it's plausible that any one of them could end up being the nominee. I'm thinking of Warren or Kamala Harris. Nobody ever talks about Claire McCaskill. She's in a re-election now. She's really good. Amy Klobuchar. There's a lot of women that. Nikki Haley may primary Trump. I don't know. So I think it is. I think it's not in the too far off lane. I did not imagine that I was writing this letter of advice to the first woman president to someone who's not on the planet now.
Questions? Oh, I think I know you. Olivia.
Hi, I'm Olivia. I'm 16.
Know. It's really great to meet you.
That's my mom. I go to Central High School, by the way. Where do you go to school? I'm Caroline. I go to Mount. So I'm just wondering, I know times have changed and roles for women have expanded. And people look at women in a different light now. But I know this is probably a commonly asked question, but as a woman who wants to grow up and be a leader in the workforce in her community, do you have any advice for that?
Yes. You should stay as, how old are you?
16.
Okay. So do you feel more confident now or more or less confident than you did when you were 9 years old?
Probably less.
Yes, exactly. My big epiphany is there is nothing more confident in the world than a 9-year-old girl.
I agree with that.
Right. Caroline, right? So she's like, yeah. So, and it's like, so we come into the world with all of this confidence, and think we're amazing because we are. And then somewhere along the line, like you start getting all these signals from society, it's like hard as your parents tried to protect you and keep you that like precious, confident 9-year-old girl, we start to become inhibited. And so my big advice, it's like when I wrote this book, I thought like, I want young women, I want women like you to read it and like, don't learn those lessons. Don't, be as fierce and confident as you were at 9 years old your whole life. Because that's how I feel now, right? I feel like 40 years later, I am that girl that I was when I was 9 years old. And that is, and I think your generation gets to be the ones that don't do that. You were in the March for Our Lives, where, where this really occurred to me was watching Yolanda King. MLK's granddaughter. She's just so confident, so joyful, 9 years old. Emma Gonzalez is standing up there. She's just like, she's got tears streaming down her face for 6.5 minutes. The time that it took for that shooting to happen. And it's like, I don't ever want, to tell Emma Gonzalez that it's not okay to cry, right? That was such a powerful moment, right? Full of power. She's crying. That's just like her expressing this emotion. And Yolanda King, 9 years old. Enough is enough. That's what my dream is. So that is what it's simple advice. It's all you need to do. Go back to her. Fierce as that.
Thank you. That was a good answer.
Another former colleague back here, Missy Kincaid.
Oh my God. Missy Kincaid, this is so exciting. Missy Kincaid was there when I met Stephanie on that first day.
I didn't see the daggers, but
Missy and I were like desk mates. Yeah.
we were, and it's wonderful to see you. So I'm here with my parents, and I said to my mom, we need to buy this book for my daughter for Mother's Day. We need to buy the book for my son, because I think what we're talking about is so important, because my father raised 3 daughters who said, you can do anything, and my mother said, you can do anything. But I almost wondered, Jennifer, I said, let's get it for my daughter. And I've raised a son who I believe knows Madam President's going to happen, but it almost made me realize this is also a book for the young men of this world who need to hear this message.
I think that, I've had a lot of my friends who have sons who've read it, given it to their sons, and said the same thing. Or my book agents who are both Republican men in their 40s, and read it and said, wow, I hadn't quite looked at it that way before. And it's not, I'm really, as I express in the book, I really believe, I've never felt in my life that men are trying to hold me back or don't want anything but for women to succeed. But what I think neither one of us, the sides of the gender divide see is some of the thinking that we've just had handed down to us, and how women have internalized that. And I think it's great. I think it's great. It's a good Father's Day gift too. But a lot of people have given it to their sons, and particularly young men, boys. This generation, I just find they're just sort of instinctually kind of get this too. But it's. I definitely, find them in the audience as well.
Time for one more question, and I see Annalie's mom, Stacy, back there. Yes.
Back in the 1970s, my mother went into a career that was predominantly men, and believe it or not, it was real estate. But men owned that career, and she went into one of the second largest companies in Central Arkansas, and they weren't too nice to her. And she had a lot of lessons that she learned from that ordeal, and then more women got into the career. My mother used to say this. She said, men help each other. There's this camaraderie. And she always used to question whether or not the group sports they played, and I love that my daughters played soccer and stuff, but she thought there was something about men learned how to pat each other on the butt better than women did, is what she said. But I'd like to know this, because I've been here in Little Rock my whole life, and there's so many mornings I wake up and think I want to get out of here, and I never do. Do you think it's a little worse in the South than it is up north?
No, you mean about women supporting other women, or women?
About the whole men.
The whole thing.
The whole thing, yeah.
I think it feels different. I've been in a lot. It feels different post-election across the board to me. And I've spent time since the election in Mississippi, quite a bit of time actually. I know it's going to surprise everyone. It's the state I was born in. Go ahead, roll your eyes, but you're not from there. Well, I was born there, and it's where I learned to breathe and read and write. So I feel partial to it. But it just feels different after the election. I have had the sense in my career that men support each other because there's just that culture, again, going back to when that culture was created, centuries and centuries and centuries ago. and that there's been a sense that women are in competition. And again, I think what's at the root of that is a sense that we don't really belong here. Men don't feel, I mean, men are in competition with each other, but they don't feel like there's only so many slots for them. And it's like, I did a video the other day to give advice for women who are graduating from college now, and I said, always support, lift up other women, always. Don't ever give it another thought. Don't just make that pledge today and don't ever look back. And don't ever think that if I invite her to a meeting, that means there's not room for me or there's only enough room for women. It's insane. It's insane. It's literally insane. There are more women on the planet than men. That there is not a limit to how many of us can be here. And it is, and I have found since the election, like when I'm writing this book, any woman that I ask to help me, they're like, what can I do? Everyone's like, everybody, drop whatever you're doing over here, Palmieri, she needs help. Now we're like, okay, Cecile Richards' book's out. Okay, everybody, stop, over here, help Cecile. It's just, and it's been this amazing experience of women just having each other's back, and I feel like everyone is rising because of it. And by the way, it's not pie. It doesn't mean that if women are doing better, men do worse, right? I just feel like we're all gonna do better, and that's what feels like it's changed. There's this one woman over here who's had her, yeah.
Yes. Hello, how are you? I want to say thank you so much for coming. My name is Nora Buzihay, and I recently graduated from the Clinton School back in 2017, and I'm currently getting my doctorate in education at UA Little Rock. Growing up in the 90s, the question you would always get is, what do you want to be when you grow up? An answer that I never saw was be the President of the United States. During the elections, I was actually working in Dubai with the US government at the consulate, and I was so excited to finally put my vote in, to put that vote in to break the barrier, the stigma that we've had for years and years. And I even sent my ballot 6,500 miles away to vote for the potential of first woman president. What I saw was the lack of women supporting women for a high role. Because during the times of women having the right to vote, all women came together as one to push that. For me is, why did women, as one womanhood, come together to fight and push for that first woman to president? So my question to you is, where do you think the gap lies, and how can we push forward to close that gap? It might be a tough question, but.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think about it all the time. I think that, some women just didn't agree with Hillary Clinton, and I accept that, some people just disagree with her worldview and her approach. And gender bias isn't gender biased, right? So we all hold these things in our head, and I feel like, when you hear people say things about Hillary, and I would hear this a lot from women in particular, there's something about her I just don't like. There's something about her I just don't trust. And I went, how are we going to get the root of that? People would ask us that all the time, right? So I went back and I watched interviews of her and about her from the 92 campaign. Man on the street, women on the street interviews. People are not mean-spirited. What do you think about Bill Clinton's wife? I don't know. There's something about her I just don't like. And they're honestly, sincerely puzzled by it. And I think that she vexes people. She confounds them. They don't know what to make of her. There's something about her they just don't like. And she has always, her whole life, stepped just a little outside of the role that women have traditionally held, from when she gave her commencement address at Wellesley, and she ended up on the cover of Life magazine as the female face of the baby boomer generation. And then the next time we saw her, although we didn't know she was the same person, she was here, and she was Hillary Rodham, married to the governor. She was a lady lawyer, and there was something about that we just didn't like, and so she became Hillary Clinton. And then She said she didn't stay home and bake cookies, and she was the first lady who worked in the West Wing. It's not radical, and it doesn't seem radical in today's eyes, but it sure made people feel uncomfortable in real time. And it's not, again, I don't think it's that like everybody's sexist or trying to hold her back. They just don't know what to make of her. And that's what I felt was like at the root of this. And a lot of women couldn't relate to her. She had this very extraordinary, singular experience too. I'm not as smart as her. I could never do what she does. I don't get it. And that's what I felt was at the at the root of that kind of doubts that people have around her. And she went through all this with me. My very first day I worked for her on the campaign, sat down and just laid everything out that she'd been through the last 30 years and how people in the press reacted to her. And she said, at the end of it, she said, I'm just a simple and serious person, and I don't understand why I provoke such rage in some people. And I was like, and she's, it's like, it was such a poignant moment because you see there's this thing that's Hillary Clinton, and then there's this person that we all know. And that's just when you realize this isn't about her. The rage, even some of the adulation isn't about her either. It's like what the first woman had to go through. I mean, it makes me really sad that my friend had to be the one to do that because it was brutal. And she would have been an amazing president. But I really think she made it possible for us to see what's at the root of that. And I think next time, there's probably going to be a little more enthusiasm across the board, but particularly from women, about supporting this first one.
Jen, thank you so much for coming back to Little Rock for this program. Skip, thank you, and Nikolai for hosting this wonderful program with the Clinton Foundation. Jen is now going to move outside the Great Hall to her signing table, so if you'll let her get out and get set, all of you who purchased books, or if you just want to stop by and say hello to her and meet her, we'd love for you to do that too. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and once again, thank you, Jen.